Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're ready to start a brand new book.
Always good starting a new book.
Yeah, I know you like it.
Yeah.
So where are we going to go?
We are going to the famous book of 2 Kings.
2 Kings.
Well, and so here's the funny part. 1 Kings and 2 Kings used to be together. It was one book or one big scroll.
Yeah.
And you can just see somebody going, right about here. Because literally it's cut off.
Yeah, really.
So the end of 1 Kings ends very abruptly. Nothing is sewn up.
Yep.
And then 2 Kings, they just start talking.
Very abruptly, like, you already know this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So basically you're saying if we just erase the 2 Kings at the top. And
or a little glue, put it back together, and we can have one book. So I don't want to recap 1 Kings, but we do have to say one of the big things is the nation of Israel has been split into two sides.
Yeah.
Not a civil war, but everything but a civil war.
War,
Yeah.
right.
So we have what we call the northern kingdom, and we're going to refer to them as Israel, and that's most of the tribes. And then we also have the southern kingdom, and that would be the big tribe of Judah and the two smaller tribes, Simeon and Benjamin, are there together. And so they sometimes talk to each other. They sometimes war against each other. Sometimes have some battles.
Yeah.
Sometimes team up against
somebody else, right?
Yeah, but for all intents and purposes, it's two different nations.
And that happened basically immediately after Solomon's death, right? We had Saul, we had David, we had Solomon. Solomon died, and everything just went, right?
Right. So we know that there's going to be 40 kings throughout the rest of 1 Kings and 2 Kings after the split, and we know the vast majority of them are bad. And on the northern side, or Israel, they're all bad.
Yep.
Southern side, I think there's 7 good ones.
Yeah.
And that's good as relative.
Yeah, so that out of that 40, we're talking 20 and 20, which is sort of interesting because there's a ton of overlap, and some are long and some are short. And
So we end really focusing on the northern tribe or Israel. They have a king by the name of Ahab, and he is the worst king so far.
So far, being the key word.
And we see that, I think we saw it 3 times last week.
He's the worst king so far. Yeah. No, he's the worst king so far.
Then his son came. And, So his wife was Jezebel, like the famous Jezebel there. So Ahab had died in battle, and that's kind of where we end.
1 Kings.
Yeah, 1 Kings.
And so now 2 Kings just picks up the story,
takes off with that. So we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 1 through most of the way through chapter 4. But Ahab is dead now, and his son takes over, and Moab has rebelled against Israel.
Yeah. Now Moab, just a little bit of history, right? Moab is the descendant. The tribe of Moab, the nation of Moab, is the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew, and one of his daughters. After Lot and his daughters escaped from Sodom, Genesis chapter 19, the 2 girls got pregnant from their dad, and one of them had Moab, one of them had Ammon. Okay, Moab actually means from my father, from the father. And so they are related, sort of distant cousins to the Israelites. And they would have been in what's modern day Jordan. Okay, north of the Edomites, as the Israelites were done with their 40 years of wandering, they were going to work their way up the east side of the Jordan River and then go into the land of Canaan. They had to go through the land of Moab to do that. So you can see that in Numbers and Deuteronomy.
Okay. And they were allowed to do that?
Well, the Moabites didn't like it so much. So there's some long-seated animosity there.
Yeah. Okay, so King Ahab is dead, and his son, and I need help with his name, Hazael?
Yes.
Ooh, getting better.
Yeah.
He falls through a window, and he thinks he's going to die. So, of course, he sends a messenger to Baal-zebub.
Baal-zebub, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The god of Ekron, to ask him if he would.
God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to ask him if he would survive this injury. So, think how odd this is.
So, king of Israel is going to ask a pagan god if he's going to survive this fall.
Yeah. So we would place this king on the bad list. But this is where they are, right? And this is where he is. And in fact, God's in the same place because God talks to Elijah and says, you got to go talk to this guy.
Yeah.
Because so God told him to meet, and with the message, why have you strayed so far from me? Because you've strayed so far, you're not going to leave this bed, and you're going to die. the messengers returned to the king. They relayed the message. Elijah didn't actually go there. He kind of met some people halfway, and they didn't know it was Elijah. And the king's like, who'd you talk to? Who'd you talk to? And they said, some hairy guy with a leather belt tied around him. And he goes, Elijah.
So, fun fact. What Elijah was wearing, what he's described as wearing, that is real similar to what John the Baptizer wore in the Gospels. Okay,
Right.
And so it was sort of like this prophetic
Right.
costume or outfit or something. And so the fact that John was wearing that is what made people say, "Are you the prophet? Are you?" And Jesus actually said he was coming in the spirit of Elijah.
Right.
And so there's
that's
some
very interesting.
connections and some similarities there.
Yeah. So the king wanted to talk to Elijah. So he sends a captain and 50 soldiers, and Elijah's sitting on top of a hill, and the captain says, "Come down." And Elijah says, "If I'm a prophet, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your men." And fire came down. So the king sends a captain
Another
and 50 more, and the exact same thing happens. So the third time, you're now the captain, right?
Yeah.
So the captain, I'm sure, tentatively came and definitely said,
white flag, maybe.
Yeah, definitely said, have mercy on me, and pleaded with him, pleaded for his life and the life of his men, which I thought was kind of cool from the standpoint of he did seem to be worried about his men and their lives. After all, 100 people before him have died. So God tells Elijah, "Go with them, you'll be safe." And Elijah restates the message: "Is there no God in Israel that where you can seek a message? And therefore you're going to die." So he died in his bed, and his brother became king, which really means he didn't have any offspring. So it went to his brother. In chapter 2, we learn that Elijah is going to be taken up to heaven in a windstorm. So it's kind of, we get that news early, so we know it in chapter 2. Mm-hmm. But Elijah and Elisha, and I'm going to get the names switched, so yeah, you're going to have to deal with it. But the same way, keeping these two guys straight is a little bit hard and always hard. But they were traveling together, and Elisha a couple times said, "I'm never going to leave you. I won't leave you." So they went to the Jordan River, and there were 50 members of. Oh, okay. I figured I already messed up.
No. There's just a really funny line in here. I'm waiting till you get there.
Yeah. There are 50 members. I just read it. There are 50 members of a guild that stood opposite at a distance while Elijah and Elisha were at the river.
Yeah. Well, it's just funny. So twice in here, because you said Elijah's like, "I'm never going to leave you. You're going to be fine." And the prophets of Bethel and then the prophets of Jericho both come to Elisha at different times and say, "You know that he's being taken away, right?" And both times Elisha says, and this is in verses 3 and 5, "Yes, I know. Be quiet."
So it's kind of, I know that. I think that's why we were told at the beginning too. Yes. So we knew it was true. So Elijah takes his cloak, folds it, hits the water. The Jordan River divides so they can cross on dry ground. And once on the other side, Elijah asks Elisha what he can do for him before he leaves. He's been good. Is there something I can give you or do for you? And Elisha asks for a double potion of the prophetic spirit. Yeah, which is really cool, right?
Yeah, and
I want to be able to.
Well, yeah, whatever spirit you have, I want to. I'm not just your apprentice. If I'm supposed to be the guy, I want to be the guy, right? So. I mean, I don't see any arrogance in here or anything. I think this was
I want to be able to do my job.
Yeah. So what's funny, or not funny, what's interesting, I guess, is that it literally happened. So the number of miracles that Elijah has recorded, double for Elisha. I mean, it's actually double in 1st and 2nd Kings here.
Nice. Elijah always says, "That's a hard request," which seems odd to me.
It's
right, and there's not a reason why. Yeah, it's just kind of one of those lines that's just kind of tossed out. And he ends up saying, it may be so if you stay with me and you see me going up.
Yeah, don't leave. Basically, pay attention.
Yeah.
Right?
So a fiery chariot pulled by fiery horses comes between them, kind of separates them, and Elijah goes up to heaven in a windstorm. Yeah. So there's question if the windstorm is the power or the chariot's the power.
Well, and there's even a question. There's still some, and you'll read it in here. There's some people who asked Elisha, well, maybe it just dropped him somewhere else. Should we go look for him? And he's like, no.
No. In fact, these 50 guys that I talked about.
But there are still people today who believe, well, taken up to heaven may or may not actually be the literal translation. Maybe he was just dropped off somewhere else,
right?
And he died, a natural death further somewhere else. It doesn't actually necessarily say. I mean, our translation says taken up to heaven. I'm not sure if that's exactly literal or if it's just taken, right, like a rapture. We usually think of Enoch in Genesis 5 and Elijah here in 2 Kings 2 as being raptured or taken,
pre-raptured,
alive.
Right.
So, it's just a thought. But it's funny that even back then they were like, maybe it was just like an Uber and it dropped him off somewhere else. And
So it was a windstorm, but then it went 3 miles and dropped.
It's like the Wizard of Oz. It's going to take him up and drop him off somewhere else.
Yeah. So Elijah leaves, and Elisha puts on his cloak, takes his clothes off, puts on his cloak, and he's at the shore. Does the same thing that Elijah did.
Mm-hmm.
Takes the cloak off, separates the Jordan, and walks back across it. And on the other side were those 50 prophets who saw exactly what went on. They dedicated themselves to Elijah.
Yeah, I mean, they recognized that God was with him, that he was God's spokesman now, and they're like, we'll work with you, we'll serve you.
Yeah, so the first thing, and these are the guys that said, hey, maybe he dropped off somewhere. Should we go look for him? And Elisha's like, no, but we're going to go look for him. And so they leave.
Fine, go look for him. And they came back like 3 days later. We couldn't find him. Didn't I say don't go look for him?
Right. So there's 2 things that we see at the end of chapter 2 that shows a little bit of his authority. First, there was a city that had bad weather, and it doesn't produce any crops. And Elisha asked for a new jar and put some salt in.
Bad water, right?
Yep.
Bad water.
Yeah. And I need my glasses. Sorry. Thank you.
No, that's all right. Bad water. Yeah.
So he takes the jug that has the salt in it, and he throws the salt into the spring, and says, "The Lord says this water's been purified," which is, definitely a miracle. And you're like, what are we doing here?
It's really interesting because this is so similar. Some of the miracles that we're going to see God doing through Elisha are going to be like close to Jesus or Moses or some others. Like when I read this one, I think of when Moses and the Israelites have left Egypt, they go to an oasis. The water is bad. He throws a hyssop branch in it, and it's purified. Yeah. Here he's throwing salt in. So we're seeing God do the same. It's like Habakkuk said. We've heard the stories of what you did. We'd like to see it in our time again. Elisha is doing some of these things because Israel is so dark and so far away from God. God's like, okay, I'm going to change a little details, but I'm doing this. I'm the same God. I'm doing the same thing for you, like I did with Moses and some of these other guys.
Yep. And the second one I think is similar in that aspect, but a little different. So he traveled to Bethel, and some young boys made fun of him, and hey Baldy, what are you doing? And Elisha called down God's judgment, and 2 female bears came out and tore 42 boys apart.
Yeah,
I mean that's pretty serious here.
You don't mess with Mama Bear.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like bad news, but the only thing I can think about is maybe Elisha needed to do that because the story would go all before him and everybody would leave him alone.
Yeah, so it was, he wasn't like, a bear whistle or whatever.
Yeah.
He said, God's going to judge you. And God chose to do it in this way because they were not showing him the respect that the prophet of God should have. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so in chapter 3, we learn in the first chapter that Moab rebelled against Israel, and we get more information here. So Moab would send a yearly tribute to Israel, and after Ahab died, Moab took the opportunity just to stop it.
Yeah, so this is going to back up before chapter 1 a little bit, right? Just give us some historical information and then push back forward.
Right. And I think we could contrast this if we wanted to against Solomon and the king of Tyre. So when Solomon took over, one of the first things he did was he reached out to his allies and either asked things of them or gave them something just to shore up that alliance. And here it was just split beforehand.
Yeah.
All right. So now we got a new king, right? And Jehoram was in Samaria with and King Jehoshaphat of Judah.
Judah. And we've seen Jehoshaphat for quite some time now,
right.
you know.
Long reign.
Yeah, with Ahab back into even First Kings.
Right. So Moab, or after Moab rebelled, the northern kingdom sent a message to the southern kingdom and said, "Hey, you want to form an alliance, and we're gonna go beat up the king of Edom, or of Moab, sorry." And they also asked the king of Edom to join them. So they had three kings together, right? And three kings are gonna go take on Moab. So
Three guys who are usually either two against one.
yeah, exactly, right, which is weird to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay, but also, yeah, that's all right. I'm all over the place. So they take off. It seems like they get into where they want to go into Moab, and now they can't find their way. So they're wandering around for 7 days with three armies.
Recalculating.
Exactly. That's how I even put that. No Google. Yeah. And now they're at a risk of running out of water and probably running out of food too.
Yeah.
So they decide to ask a prophet of God, what should we do? Right. Which is kind of cool because it seems like this king has learned that let's ask a prophet first.
Yeah.
And in fact, let's ask one of our prophets instead of another one. So what they ended up doing is they made a number of cisterns. So basically they dug holes.
Yeah, dry wells.
Yeah. And the idea was there was enough water. It wasn't going to come from the sky, but it would come down. They must have been on a hill or close to a valley. So they dug all these cisterns and they waited. And these cisterns would fill up, and then the animals could drink from it. And Elisha said that Moab would be handed over to the people. And then he also said, you have to, once that happens, he gave them specific orders that he got from God.
Right.
And we see this happening a lot in the Old Testament. But in this case, chop down every productive tree, stop up all the springs, and cover the cultivated land with stones.
Yeah.
So we'll see in the end where the soldiers were just grabbing a stone as they walked by and then throwing it in the field on their way out of town.
Field. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
basically, we're going to make Moab desolate.
right.
I mean, you can't grow anything. There's nothing. It's done.
So the next morning, the cisterns were full, and all the Moabites they were mustered, and they were at the border. Right? They know that these three armies are there, and they looked in the distance, and they're like, "Is that blood?" Because they didn't realize that there were cisterns that were now full of water, and of course, water kind of gets weird, when you're looking. And they're like, "It's blood
All over the ground. There's blood out there.
They must have fought each other," which is a pretty logical conclusion.
Given who's there, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't even last one day with each other.
Yeah. So they approached the camp. And it seems like they all approached the camp instead of let's send out one or two.
Right, yeah. No scouting here.
Yeah.
Right?
So of course they were easy pickings, right?
Yeah.
And they were slaughtered. So the three kingdoms, they tore down the cities. Every man threw the stone in the field, and they stopped up all the springs. They did everything that God asked them to do.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that to the capital, which I thought was pretty cool. So now they're at where the capital is, and the Moab king saw he was losing in a war. So he took 700 swordsmen and he tried to break through, and that didn't work. So the Moab king offered a sacrifice of his son to his pagan god.
Yep.
And the Bible says there was an outburst of divine anger against Israel, so they broke off the attack. So here's a deal where Israel chose to stop that battle, but they actually won the war. And the idea is, or at least the only good that I could think about it, is that they fought Moab and stopped because Moab, even though it doesn't say it, seems like they would continue with their tributes then, right? And if they would have wiped everybody out, and if they would have totally made the land barren, there would be no way that anybody could give them a tribute.
Yeah.
One, there would be no people there, and two, there would be nothing for the land to produce.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's really weird because it says the outburst of divine anger was against Israel, not against Moab. Even though it was the Moabite king that sacrificed his son,
right.
So there's some weird stuff. I mean, I would think that maybe God wanted them to wipe them out, and this is almost going like Saul did with the Amalekites. He was supposed to wipe them out, and then he's like, "Oh, but we saved the best for God," And I mean, I'm just seeing, the saying is, history is, those who don't pay attention to history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
I mean,
Just
I'm just
over
seeing
and
these same things over and over and over. So yeah, I think there's two different ways to look at it. Maybe Israel was like, well, but we'll just keep getting some tribute this way, and God's like, you should have wiped them out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we end in chapter 4, and again we're just going through verse 37, and there's two more things that we learn about Elijah. So Elijah, we know, wasn't the only prophet. There was another prophet, and he died. And the wife told Elijah that the creditors were going to come to take her 2 sons as servants.
Which is really interesting. I mean, just there's a whole thing behind this where, of course, you have the guild of the prophets, and there was 50 prophets. So there are other prophets, but one prophet is in debt apparently, and we don't know to whom or for what. But even they were under the law of.
Well, I was going to say, isn't the Mosaic law like, 1, you shouldn't be in debt, and 2, how can you give up your kids?
No, I mean, you can be in debt. You're not supposed to charge exorbitant interest, right? Okay. The usury. Right. But yeah, if you have a debt, you can actually sell yourself or your family into slavery to that person until the debt's paid off, and then. I mean, this is a very
comes back.
Very, very natural, very normal. So even the prophets were under the law. Yeah.
So Elijah told the lady to get all of her empty containers and get all that she can from her friends. And then he said, pour your oil into a container. And so she did, and then they got another container and another container and another container, and all the containers that they had were full of oil. So, that was the miracle.
From that one small thing.
Yeah, that she had.
So again, going back to like Elijah, right? As the flour and the oil that don't run out. Now it's a bottle of oil that doesn't run out.
Yep. And then he said, go sell the olive oil to pay the debt off. And actually there was enough to help them live for the rest of their lives too.
A prophet with a prophet.
Different Pete. All right. So the second one was a little different, and there's a couple miracles here. And there's a woman, and we know that she's prominent, which I take to be rich. And the question is, in my mind, is she Jewish? And it seems to me that if she's not Jewish, she is still of the faith, and she still believes in God. And the reason it's kind of questionable is she seems unfamiliar with some of the rules and the Jewish rules, and she has no idea who Elijah is either. And her husband even seems a little worse than that.
Well, even if, don't forget though, because Israel is so far away from God that they're not following stuff anyway. So you do that for enough generations and people forget who, what they're supposed to do. Yeah.
So she's been very accommodating to Elijah. Elijah, as he comes through town, he's going to need a place to stay, and she always puts him up. And in fact, so much that not only does she feed him, she also had a small upper room made for him too, made up for him.
Yeah, a little apartment for the prophet.
Yep. So Elijah wanted to repay her for her kindness, but she, as I said, she's rich. She didn't need anything. So Elijah asks his assistant, Gehazi, as in Ghazi, or not like Gaza.
No, Gehazi. Yeah,
Gehazi.
Yeah, Gehazi.
Okay, so Elijah's assistant Gehazi, hey, what's she need? And you can just see, right? Christmas presents, you're always asking.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, what's my wife need? Well, you should probably know this, but. And he replied, hey, she doesn't have any sons.
Yeah.
And her husband is old. And Elijah said she's going to have a son by next year. And tells her that, and she's like, don't mess with me. Are you serious? Yeah. So that was the first miracle. And then the second miracle was years later. This boy was out in the field, and his father was out there, and the boy said he had a headache, and he finally collapsed, and he was carried into his mom and died in her lap.
Man,
right.
It's easy to read.
Right. But, and then you think about it, especially as a father.
Yeah, it's like, that you take a second to read that again. It's like, oh, man.
Right. So she lays him down on the prophet's bed, so in the upper room in Elijah's bed, and then immediately went to visit him. She didn't even tell her husband where she was going or what was wrong. She asked him to...
Yeah, it's interesting because he says, well, why do you want to go today? It's not a new moon or a Sabbath. So there's still some, some religious connection there.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. So Gehazi went out to see her. So she saw him, or he saw her coming. So, hey, what's wrong? And she wouldn't tell him. And then when she found Elijah, she grabbed him by the foot and wouldn't let go of him. I mean, you need to help.
You have
me.
to come help.
Not your assistant, not anybody else. I want you. And Elijah said, the Lord has kept this matter hidden from me.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
That is way cool.
So obviously God talks to Elisha, talked to Elijah, the other prophets, told them what was going on. But Elisha was very much caught off guard with this.
Which had to be kind of cool, right? I mean, if you know everything all the time.
Well, yeah. And he told Gehazi, he's like, run, take my staff and run, don't stop, and put it on the boy's face. And it didn't help at all. It didn't do anything.
Right. So meanwhile, so that assistant, he takes off, and then Elijah is talking to the lady, and she's like, "I'm not leaving. You're not leaving me. I'm not leaving you." And he's like, "All right, let's go." Let's go. So they travel more slowly on their way. Let's see. So the assistant did what was asked, like you said. Nothing happened. So when Elijah got there, he went into the upper room alone and spread his body over the boy's body, brought him back to life.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
The boy's skin turned warm, which meant it was cold.
Yeah.
And then he sneezed 7 times. I'll ask you about that in a second.
That's an interesting
Yeah, but this was
detail,
the second miracle. So, yeah, sneezed 7 times.
I don't have an answer. There's nothing in the law that says if you sneeze 7 times, you're
right.
okay.
Right.
But this lady, she's like, you're the one who gave me the son. I didn't have one, and now God is taking him away, and all this, and
right.
I mean, it's understandable, right?
Right. And you are the one coming back.
Yeah.
So interesting. So that's the end of this week for the reading. Kind of cool. We have now have a new prophet. And we are learning more about him. So we know he's bald. And don't make fun of him. That's my 2 big takeaways.
Yeah.
No, there's plenty of takeaways.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here, and we actually more about Elisha than about the kings right now. We'll get back to the kings a little bit, but yeah, there's God is establishing that he is still there, even though nobody wants to pay attention to him or acknowledge him. He's still at work. And he's doing some pretty odd things, and yet, like I said, they're reminiscent of previous prophets.
That is a really interesting point.
And we'll see some that
because as you read it, you'll pick up on them.
Yeah. So as you pick up on things like that, share the things that you've been seeing, that you've been learning, and we really love to hear those. Share this with friends and family. Subscribe, and we'll continue. In fact, we'll pick up with a couple of miracles right away next time. Right. And Elisha's just going to keep doing this stuff, and making sure that God is known even in a dark place. And that's a good lesson for us too. So we'll pick up here and see you back here next time.
Bye, everybody.